Welcome, everybody. So in the next 30 minutes or so, I'll hope to run through uh, sort of the end-to-end workflow in MYOB Advanced, specifically to do with manufacturing. But I'll just like to point out now I'm logged in to the system using a browser. So this is all browser enabled. It's native to the cloud. And basically, any device which you have access to a browser, you can basically log in from anywhere in the world. So I'm using Google Chrome for today's demonstration, and basically I've logged in as Michael Andrews to this system, and he is typically, I'm assuming he's the production manager for this hypothetical example. They're in the business of manufacturing bicycles and sub-assemblies related to that. So I'm going to run through a typical example of that. But before I do, I just want to, for those who may not have had some familiarity with Advanced, just briefly run through what you'll be greeted as part of this user interface. So typically once you log in, you will see a dashboard typically set up for that user role. These are highly configurable depending on the type of user. And you can see different alerts, dashboards, and charts. And you can basically take action as soon as you log in. You can see all the exceptions which you need to manage. So if you go into a different type of dashboard, like manufacturing dashboard, it gives more detail in terms of scrap analysis and late production orders and such. And also any open orders as such as well.
Tharanga, is that something easy for users to edit after they've started using the product?
Definitely, once they get used to it, they have ability to design their own dashboards depending on. So typically that would be limited to the super users. We don't want everybody changing the dashboards, but typically you can. And basically, Advanced makes use of something known as generic inquiries, where we use a lot of these inquiry screens or grid sort of structures, which basically we can be created by the users, and they in turn can be translated into these widgets or dashboards, basically. So it's very user friendly, and if you're used to Excel, it has basically the same functionality as Excel in terms of filtering and so on.
And those are real time, right? So they are refreshing how often, whenever you need that.
Oh, you can basically set up the refresh, or you can just force the refresh as well. So you can set it up as in part of the dashboard design as well.
Yep.
Good question. So in terms of the UI, I'll be using this search bar on top basically to interface with the system without having to memorize the menu structures or locating things. So if I'm, say, after a bill of material screen, I can just, if I can type correctly, I can basically say bill, and basically any menu item which uses that keyword pops up, and you can basically home in on that. You can also use that search bar to basically search any transactions as well. So let's say type ABC. If there's a customer named ABC or a transaction referring to that, you can basically look that up as well. So this is the universal search, which does help you save time trying to look up items. It's quite user-friendly in that regard. You do, failing that, you can basically use the workspaces on the right, which are also configurable depending on what you want to show. So you can expand the workspace depending on what you're after as well. Not only that, you can notice that I've starred a few, which is basically it's basically favorites. So basically you can have your frequently accessed items for your own personal workspace, which is just for yourself. So there's a couple of ways you can interact with the system. Okay, so what I want to do now is basically jump into a stock item record. Let's make that a bit bigger so that you can probably see that. So in terms of, before I dive into the actual workflow, I just wanted to say, so this is basically a bicycle, the stock item for this bicycle which you're selling as part of your operation. So this is a manufactured item. We can set up different valuation methods for this particular item as well, including, and these settings are also relevant for your raw materials and sub-assemblies as well. So keep that in mind. We can also track this if you are interested in tracking by lot number or serial number or even expiry dates. If you're in that kind of business, you can basically track raw materials by those particular attributes.
And on that question, I think a lot of people, and I think people that are relevant on this call as well, they might be tracking batch numbers or lot numbers on their raw material and not on the final product.
Yes.
But to understand, Tracer, do you have the option to split that final product versus raw material?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. So basically, this is the final product, but if you look at a raw material item, you can basically track that in a different methodology as well. So it's highly configurable in that regard. Not only that, you can also set different units of measure, which is, in this case, I'm looking at the finished good, but even for raw material, you might be getting metal in lengths or meters. So and depending on the supplier, you can set up multiple units of measure depending on that. So in this case, I've assumed that we're going to sell bicycles, but you might group them in a box of 6. You can basically do that as well. So similar methodologies for raw materials as well.
And you can obviously then do pricing and stock takes by those different units of measure as well, right? To make things simpler.
Correct.
Yep.
And you can also do the barcoding based on that as well. So you can basically have a barcode for the box as opposed to a single item.
Yep.
So we have multiple tabs. I'm not going to go through all of them, but basically relevant for manufacturing would be sort of setting up your default bill of materials. Having said that, it'll default to 1, but you can set up multiple versions of that, which I will show you shortly. You can also default the scrap locations, also how it's the behavior of the item in terms of the default for production or is it for purchasing. You can set all of that up. And also Leo mentioned about MRP, which is which is the brains of the system. So you can basically tag it whether it should be planned for MRP purposes. And also you can set up the lot sizes, lead times at a high level in terms of these replenishment settings as well. So you can basically cater to your requirements.
And that safety stock is something you'll probably use if you do a make to stock, right? When it's not configured to order type material, correct?
Correct. You can do it either way, but mainly for stock items which you would create for sub-assemblies, which you would use on a day-to-day basis, correct?
Sure.
Okay, so I'll jump into an actual bill of materials. If I jump into this. Leo, if you could confirm you can see the pop-up screen.
I can see the pop-up.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So this is a typical bill of materials layout. So in our system, basically we have the routing and the bill of materials and the consumptions all in one page. So if you look at it on the top half, it's basically the header, which refers back to the inventory, which you just saw. You can also, in the middle half is middle section, basically, you can see the routing, the different work centers and the different the sequence of operations it'll run through. And also each of these workspaces will have its own material consumption at the bottom. And that's what I've tagged in at the bottom here. So it's using its own inventory. And all of this can be multi-level as well. So for example, the wheel might have its own bill of materials in this case. So that's where it'll explode the BOM out for multi-level purposes. So yeah, you can manage that. So also, you can also see there's steps as well. So you can document any instructions which are required as part of your bill of material. You can also use the system as basically centralized storage for any sketches, drawings, attachments as well. So for example, I've attached a picture of a sketch which you might use, and it's centrally stored, so you don't have to you store it on different systems as you go through it. So if I go back.
It's a beautiful bike, by the way.
That's our bread and butter in this case. So for the other aspect is you can also keep track of tools used for each work center, and you can actually capture cost in terms of usage. The other extension of this would be it can keep a count of the number of times it's been used in production, especially relevant if you use molds or dies, which have a useful life.
Fantastic.
As well.
Yeah, that's good.
So you can extend that. You can also track overheads as well. If you want to go to that detail, you can
like
track
electricity or anything else.
Yeah, rent, flow based. Yeah, and you can vary that and drive that cost based on an output measure as well, which is configurable. The other aspect is if I just quickly jump into one of these work centers, each work center can be driven by either the machine capacity or the crew size, mainly if it's labor driven. So you can set up efficiencies and such as well if you want to go to that level. Again, you can tag machines, which has its own cost attributed to that. So the part which you're not covering today is like it might be advanced for those who are aware, has very extensive GL and finance reporting capabilities. And that's where you see that you can break that up into accounts and sub-accounts depending on the cost structure which you want to track. So you can do that to that level as well. Okay, and also you have the ability to backflash materials and labor. So depending on to make the production process simpler, rather than issuing every single item, you can basically backflash, meaning automatically all these materials will be issued as you move through each operation. Yeah. But if you're doing serial tracking, as you mentioned, you might not have backflash. You would basically issue materials as you scan through and issuing it to each production order. So you got best of both worlds. Okay, so that's just an overview in terms of the BOM. or bill of material structure. Also, you notice here revision. So I mentioned earlier, you can capture multiple revisions, and you can set up expiry dates and sort of a period date range where it's valid for. You also have the ability to create what is known as ECRs, or engineering change requests and related change orders. So basically to keep track of revisions as it goes through, and can tie it to a approval workflow as well. So if you have a separate team of engineers who need to sign off on these bill of materials, you can basically keep track of that as part of revision control of bill of materials.
So if you've got multiple revisions, would you be able to create a production order for any one of those?
Yes, correct. And you can basically, as long as it's active, yes, but you can also make multiple revisions inactive or archive them as well.
Fantastic.
Not in memory. So, and you asked about revisions. The other key features, if you have multiple revisions, you might want to compare what's changed. So in this case, I have pulled up a similar BOM, but basically subtle changes in it too. So if I look at this material, I can see it highlights what's different and also where it's changed. So in this case, between revision A versus B, I have changed the consumption of that as well as the cost as well. So you can basically home in on changes immediately. So that's a couple of features we have to make life easier to manage that. Okay, so now I will actually go to the workflow side of the operation. So basically, typically this will be done by the sales team. Maybe you can manage from a lead flow perspective. You get a lead from a customer, you convert that to an opportunity, and from then on, you might create a quote for this customer, and then if that's accepted, we'll go through the sales process and through the production process. So I thought I'd start with this. So that typically you don't need to re-enter information again and again. So all of this is integrated to the manufacturing process. So for example, in this opportunity, we've already had an inquiry for 10 bicycles. We populated that. So in this stage, you might create a quote, for example, and send it off to the customer. Or if, assuming it's all accepted, we can basically create a sales order from here.
And you don't have to necessarily use the opportunities, right? That is like a CRM function if you track that, but you can just do a quote or an order.
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of integrations in advance which we integrate. So one is the CRM part, and also if you're in projects as well, so you might be tracking large scale projects, you can basically trigger production orders from there as well. So there's a couple of integration points where it does flow seamlessly through. So again, this is a sales order. So it'll basically look at the pricing, the discounting, and so on. So, and from here, you can basically save that at this point. I can basically release this to production. So I can create a production order related to this sales order. Let's say I want to create 10 bicycles. I hit create.
The process you're obviously taking us through, Tharanga, is a linear one where you say, okay, one order comes in, we now produce it. But we can obviously do bulk processing as well if there's a bunch of sales orders to then create.
Correct. And so one of the options is at this stage, rather than doing, for example, this might be an urgent order which needs to be pushed into production immediately. And basically I've done that. I've created a production order and then I can follow through on that. The other option is actually using MRP as well. So in terms of, you run the MRP cycle maybe daily or a couple of times a day. And this is the MRP display basically. So it'll tell you what we need to manufacture depending on the pending sales orders. And it'll look at the date when it's requested, it'll run through that process. And also it'll explode the BOM based on its on the raw material or sub-assemblies which you need to purchase or manufacture. So this is where the MRP really comes into play. It'll keep tracking all your documents from end to end, with it be a sales order or a planned order as such. And you have the option of taking action within the screen as well. So you can basically highlight what you need to be purchased, or for example, if Leo mentioned, you have multiple entities, multiple warehouses, for example, which you can transfer from if they have stock. And also you can basically purchase as well if you require to create a purchase order from certain suppliers. And you notice some of these items have a preferred supplier attached to it, so you don't have to key in that information again. It'll basically open up a PO ready for you to go using this functionality. So this is where basically everything gets sort of streamlined in the system. So going back to a sales order, I've created a sales order for 10 bicycles. Now I've created a related production order for that. So if I jump into that production order, it would now be in a planned status, and I'll shortly release that. But you can see that dates are all inherited from the sales order. It also retains the references back to the sales order as well, so that you can always track it back and forth. So the production team knows where it's originating from and reprioritize accordingly. You also have the references back to the bill of materials which it's using as well. So you can see
as
that.
well as the revision.
Yeah. And like I mentioned, the project. So if you're tagging this to longer term projects, for those who are in that sort of industry, you can basically tag that as well in here. So at this point, I will probably release this order because I just want to follow through that work process. Now it's in release status. So for example, if you're using MRP, you can basically see all the shortfalls in terms of raw materials. But in case you want to have a quick look, you can also use the critical materials. So you can basically jump in here and see any material which are short on hand. So in here, you can see all the materials which we require, which are actually short because we can't probably produce in full at this stage. But you can basically view and take actions in this screen as well, similar to what we did in MRP. You can
So in an estimate, if you were to do manufacture for to a specific product, if you do manufacturing to stock, I would imagine that should be as blank as possible.
Ideally, yes.
Ideally, but obviously if you do more configurable products, then obviously this will show you all the bits that needs to be purchased.
Correct. Correct. And interesting that you mentioned configuring, because we do have a separate configurator, but that's not part of today's demo, but yeah, we have that option as well. Okay, so I'll jump into that production order again. I'll show you a couple of other high-level elements of that. So if you jump into the totals, you can see the total plan cost based on that bill of materials. And as we run through the operations, these actual costs will start populating as the work in progress follows through each operation. So for this aspect, so what I can do is I can also generate a production ticket. So if you're actually using a traveler or a job sheet on the factory floor, you can basically use this as the sheet. So it's all tied back to that production order with barcodes. And you can basically use data capture either manually, or you can use the app, which I'm about to show you as well. So just bear with me for a second till I get my...
Just while you're busy with that, I think a lot of people that I've worked with in the past, a lot of the processes that happen often at that station, they would actually pre-print these off and have certain labels obviously laminated and just easy and ready to go. It's just the product or the actual order that changes. But you can scan off screen. You don't have to necessarily scan off a...
which I'm going to do at the moment. So I'm going to actually scan it off the screen. So if I jump into the app, so this is basically the app, which is included as part of the solution, which is available on the App Store for Android or Apple. Or any device which has a camera, basically. So one thing I'll just digress is basically all the dashboard which I showed at the beginning are also accessible using the app as well, and it's updated in real time as well. So you can have access. So anybody, any employee who has access to the system can access it using the app as well. So in this case, I'm going to, so for related to manufacturing, we're going to scan materials in. So I'm going to that option here. So you can basically use any device. So you don't have to purchase any special devices. You can use any device with a camera, which can run this. You can basically use that as a barcode scanner. So I'm going to scan so I'm going to open the barcode scanner. And I can basically scan production order. And it'll prompt, and you can notice if I just point there, so I can basically see it'll prompt what the next step is. So I need to scan the next operation. In this case, the preparation of frame or cutting the initial tubing for this bicycle. Then it will basically prompt me to scan the warehouse. I'm not sure how it's coming up on the screen. It might be a bit sketchy.
Yep, no, we can see it. It's all good.
Cool. So I can scan the warehouse. We do have ability to have bin locations as well. So it will prompt for the actual location so that we actually issue the right material. And then the barcode of the item, which is that one, the tube. So automatically it has defaulted to, you can basically set the quantity as well, but in this case, it's defaulting to what's required for this order. And basically at this stage, I can save that transaction and the person using can release it to this production order. So basically this is the step you might take when you're actually issuing the material to the
Yeah, so
production order.
Tharanga, I think one of the things that people have often is that there's people planning the production orders at the back office, but there's no data being collected as it goes through the process. So people know it's being built, but we don't know kind of where it is at. The idea behind this is either using obviously the app or any other device, whether it's a laptop or an iPad, to walk around and actually have data being collected as it happens, correct?
Yeah, and you can see now, if you go focus attention back into the events history of this production order, that scan materials is now updated. So I've logged in as Andy Taylor in my system. It's Andy Taylor, yep, it is. So that's the transaction which has now updated this production order in real time. And you can see the total of that material cost has also got updated for this production order. So you can see that we're flowing through. In addition to that, you can use that traveler, the barcoded traveler, to actually also capture your movements between operations as well. Furthermore, you can also capture labor time. If you're interested in capturing actual time spent on a certain operation, you can basically clock in. So if I jump into one existing, I can basically clock in, clock out as well. Just give it a moment to load up. It's still catching up, I think. It's just my phone. There you go. So you can basically do a clock in, clock out of that. There you go. You can see a button at the bottom. So you can clock in and start that timer, and then it'll attribute that time back to the production.
You can obviously then accrue some of that cost as well as part of an overhead.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As you go, rather than an overhead. Yeah.
Okay.
It's perfect. So I'll drag that out of the way. I've just given a tease of what the app can do. And also, if inventories are quite important for manufacturers, so I'm thinking also for stock taking, also you can use the app as well to maintain inventory, stock takes, and also receive and put away functions as well. Just worth mentioning.
I think just on that topic, for those that don't know, we do have multiple warehouse management solutions we can integrate with as well, and use obviously very specific scanners should that be required. But this is just the light version that comes with the product, which can do a lot of features already.
Correct. Yeah. Okay, so I'm not going to run through the entire process, but I'll just jump into the detail of this production order. And as we mentioned before, we can track the status of it running through each of these operations. So you can see now that we issued some material, it's in process. And as it's completed, we can track through each operation as it completes completes each of the work in progress items. One thing I did want to mention was, like, let's say you have, subcontracting for, like, say, what we term as outside processing. So you have the ability to track that as well in terms of creating a purchase order for that subcontractor from within this production order. So you have that ability to track what's actually at that subcontractor once it's issued, and also what's been returned back into your production for completion.
Fantastic.
So I thought I'll mention that. So in terms of the production workflow, this will go end to end. The other aspects I just want to touch on briefly is the capacity planning element of the system as well. So you can schedule all your orders. For example, this is called rough planning. So you can schedule it a number of times as a planning order, and based on the priority of your sales orders. So basically, you can set that up, and you can also view the capacity utilization as well. So in terms of the work centers, which I've shown before, like assembly, inspection, painting, and so on, you can see how much has been scheduled. So we use a term called blocks, which is configurable depending on the lowest common denominator you might use to keep track of your capacity, and you can basically have a sort of overview of what the utilizations is, or if
That
it's
is very useful.
bottleneck. So you can do this at a machine level as well, and even a cruise level as well. So if you want to, but yeah, typically you look at it as a work center.